Hello, and thank you for joining us for our Bank On Indiana Update webinar today. My name is Lucinda Nord with Indiana Association of United Ways, and I am joined by many members of our steering committee, which you will see on our next slide here. Our steering committee is comprised of representatives from ICED, through Kelsey Clayton, who manages the Indiana Assets and Opportunity Network, my office, the Indiana Bankers Association, today represented by Laura Wilson, Indiana Credit Union League, represented by Kate Neitlinger, Indiana Housing and Community Development Authority, represented by Ben Carmen, the Office of the Treasurer today represented by Caitlin Larson on behalf of Treasurer Kelly Mitchell, and then Old National Bank represented by Ben Jurgens. So let us just begin. On behalf of the steering committee, I welcome you all to our Bank on Indiana update. So most of you are already familiar with Bank On. It was designed to help the unbanked and the underbanked access safe and affordable financial products. Since 2005, Bank On Indiana has developed in nearly 100 cities, including many here in Indiana. Bank On Indiana was developed to help bring together the Bank On communities here in Indiana and share best practices among our communities. I'm going to turn it over to Kelsey Clayton of the Indiana Assets and Opportunity Network to tell you a little bit more about Bank On.
Great, thank you, Lucinda, and good afternoon, everyone. If you're on the call, you probably already understand a little bit about the needs of those unbanked and underbanked. These individuals and families are often working and have low to moderate incomes. The unbanked and underbanked are more at risk for crime and loss during disaster. And as you can see, the data shows 30% of low to moderate income households are unbanked, with 50% of that 30% being African American and Latino LMI households. After the recession, the number of unbanked and underbanked grew slightly in Indiana. Here you can see the makeup of the underbanked, primarily 35 or younger and minority, often single-headed households. The need for safe and affordable financial products is clear. Far too much money is spent on alternative financial services that have high fees or are outside the financial mainstream. This adds up over a lifetime, diminishing a person's ability to build assets or remain financially stable. And as you know, probably most of you know a lot about Bank On, but most of the local Bank Ons are comprised of key groups to make it successful, like financial institutions, nonprofit organizations, government agencies, and sometimes elected officials.
And I think on this call today, we have a good representation of a number of the financial institutions and a few of the nonprofits, just to let everyone know. So thank you all.
And we just want to send you off with some helpful resources. The Bank On Indiana website is bankonindiana.net. not .org or .com, and on there you can find local resources listed, so you can see if there is one active near you. Also, the IndianaOpportunity.net is the Indiana Assets and Opportunity Network's website. We're a statewide coalition working to support programs and organizations that build assets for low-wealth Hoosiers. You can see joinbankon.org as well as for sample documents if you're looking to start one. And then also the economicinclusion.gov is FDIC's website. And then also incredibly helpful resource that I often pull up is the scorecard from the Asset and Opportunity National Network, CFED. It assesses each state on about 135 outcomes and policy measures. So it shows kind of how residents are doing in that state. So I hope you can find some helpful resources here. So I will now turn it back to Lucinda.
Great. Thanks, Kelsey. Those are great resources. So several years ago, we had developed a best practice guide about how to get started. As I look at the attendee list for today's session, we have some folks who are in well-established bank-on communities, and then some who I think are just thinking about it. So these are the ways to start getting started. We have a pretty big effort in northern Indiana right now, just getting started, that include folks from LaPorte, St. Joe, Elkhart, and possibly Marshall and Fulton counties. So we're pretty excited about that group. We know that others on the call are just getting started. So it involves getting started with really important to have those key stakeholders involved in the planning and in the implementation. The research that is available to show you who are unbanked and underbanked and the products used is available through those websites that Kelsey just mentioned. Different communities are established, different committees are established to help identify what are the safe and affordable products, what is the available financial literacy and coaching opportunities in a community, and then typically bank-on committees will develop a marketing and outreach or a tracking and evaluation committee. All that work needs to be done before a launch is offered, and then some sort of process for ongoing communications. The next graphic here is overly complicated, but it gives you a good idea of the theory of change that, initially some of the bank-on communities were really just focused on opening checking accounts. We want to get the unbanked and the underbanked access to a second chance account. One of the challenges that has been seen is that we ultimately want people to become more financially stable as they're using safer and more affordable financial products. So ultimately, we want the long-term asset building to be part of that theory of change, not just access to a checking account or access to an account, but really increased financial stability. So let me introduce one of our banking partners, Ben Jorgens from Old National Bank, to tell us a little bit about financial institutions. And Ben, you may need to speak up.
Absolutely. Good afternoon. So the slide you're looking at really represents a number of banks and credit unions and branches throughout the state. A little fun fact is it's actually easier to find a bank or a credit union branch than it is a Starbucks in Indiana. Financial institutions are well represented in the bank-on through the Indiana Bankers Association and the Indiana Credit Union League. Okay, and as Lucinda mentioned a little bit earlier, early innovators identified best practices in developing and maintaining bank-on. I'm not going to read all of these to you, as you can see those there, but a few communities in Indiana had a real big splashy launch of bank-on, while others did so quietly and worked in building awareness through the usage through stakeholders. So I just want to take a moment to talk about the basics of your typical bank-on account. Typically, they're considered second chance accounts. They are typically low cost or free with no minimum balance requirements. One of the most important aspects is to ensure that tellers are trained that if a customer does walk into a branch and says something like, I want to open a bank-on account, that teller knows what it is and the products available. In many bank-on communities, the branches include a bank-on window cling or some sort of identifier to let those that enter the bank know that they are affiliated with the bank-on program.
Great. So these are some of those, thanks Ben for suggesting sort of the minimum elements of a bank-on account, often called a second chance account. Those items there at the bottom are what a lot of bank-on communities have started to think about. Could they ask that an account doesn't allow overdraft fees? In our initial phase, we actually talked a lot about waiving the insufficient funds fee the first time. Now there's increasing conversation about could the account be set up so that it prevents overdraft or allows electronic banking alerts. key consideration that a lot of communities discuss is that element of financial literacy, of how to make sure that folks who are accessing these second chance accounts really have access to good financial education, which a lot of the financial institutions do. So let's talk a little bit about those learnings. We've learned a lot over our Bank On implementations, which is leading us to a period of recalibration, and I think that's what brought a lot of you to our call. So what we've learned is that there have been challenges, quite honestly, in building trust among partners and potential customers. We have a customer base that is still a little hesitant to go into a traditional financial institution. They may not have any experience, or their last experience may not have been a positive one. We've had a challenge with the shared agreement about the goal of Bank On. You know, is our goal to open a maximum number of accounts, or is our goal to sustain the accounts over time, or maybe to increase those accounts to a stronger account, or maybe increase their assets, or all, as we look at financial education and its connection to it. You know, we've had some challenges with marketing and outreach, especially as we have heard very clearly from our financial institution partners that the financial institutions have a footprint that is often larger than a Bank On community. So many of our Bank Ons have been organized around a county geographic area, and that participating financial institution, the bank or the credit union, may actually have a footprint in 3 or 4 or 6 counties that it makes it a real challenge if a local Bank On community has different requirements, different expectations, different marketing from the neighbor. So that has really posed a challenge, and that sets us up for sort of what we're thinking in Bank On 2.0. Since the creation of the Bank On in 2005, there have been lots of changes in the financial services industry. I don't need to tell all of you that. You know that there's been a sort of shrinkage of certain branches and branch access. There's been some regulation changes. Just we've seen some significant changes in the financial services industry and in the products that are offered. Who would have thought that we would have been paying for things with our smartphones? So we're trying to keep up with those changes. And then lastly, the tracking and evaluation has posed really large challenges. So some of the initial innovators of Bank On found that they were able to work with the Federal Reserve Bank or the FDIC or a third-party external evaluator to really start to look at how do we show success. You know, getting to that larger question of not just opening accounts, but showing ongoing financial stability of the families or the individuals opening those accounts. But as we have expanded Bank On throughout the state of Indiana, the inconsistency has posed some challenges for tracking, and we've really wrestled with that from a Bank On Indiana steering committee, which we can talk about at the end. But at the same time, we've also found that there are great opportunities. We have found that Bank On really allows us the ability to address a real need for the underbanked and the unbanked from a multi-sector approach. This is one of the unique projects that brings together financial institutions and nonprofits from both community-based and faith-based organizations, government officials and elected officials, all working toward the same goal. And what a great opportunity that provides. It provides us an opportunity to help individuals have success with either their very first account where they have no financial literacy perhaps, or maybe a second chance account after they've maybe had a mistake in their past, as long as it's not fraud. And then lastly, we have an opportunity to help individuals reduce unnecessary fees and build their assets and gain stability. So those are just some of the learnings we've had over the last several years. So that leads us to Bank On 2.0. And what we're finding is that at the national level, now that we've had 10 years under our belts, there's really a changing landscape. And there's a sort of readiness for a refresh of Bank On. So the cities for Financial Empowerment Fund is working to identify, design, and pilot key programmatic integrations, and they fall in two basic areas. One is in the notion of what is the Bank On product. So the Cities for Financial Empowerment Fund has been working on a proposed set of account standards for going forward to say if you're going to open if you're going to announce a financial product as safe and affordable for Bank On, it should have these features. Some of the same features that we've all already agreed upon, things like a low or minimal opening balance, very low cost or free from month to month, the ability to minimize, even prevent overdraft or insufficient fund fees if possible. Some of the newer elements I think really relate to the way the financial services industry has changed, and that's things like allowing electronic bill pay, online or mobile banking, and banking alerts that might be sent to an email or a text for folks. So those are some of the account standards that are being discussed at the national level. And we as Bank On Indiana we got some feedback from our partners up in the northern part of the state. Many of the financial institutions provided us feedback, which we then provided to the national group working on that. The second area where the Cities for Financial Empowerment Fund is really working is in this notion of connecting the research to data tracking and evaluation. They recognize that we have really struggled from Bank On community to Bank On community about the notion of tracking and evaluation. You know, not just how do we define success, but really what are the metrics that would be identifiable and collectible and manageable across financial institutions and nonprofits. So those are kinds of the discussion. What I can tell you is that there will be a grant coming available very soon, hopefully this week. I think it's supposed to be announced, to help communities start to implement a Bank On 2.0 kind of model, which would incorporate new standards and new tracking. So that's why for some of you who may have been asking for Bank On suggestions over the last couple of years, I know Kelsey and I have been out talking with a number of folks. We've just sort of put a hold on some of that tracking and evaluation, waiting for Bank On 2.0 to move forward. So I'm going to turn it back to Kelsey to talk a little bit about if your community is just now thinking about launching a Bank On, what kinds of things you might want to do for next steps. Go ahead, Kelsey.
Okay, thanks, Lucinda. Yeah, as we've seen, first kind of steps if you're going to reevaluate or, begin a local Bank On, it's very important to identify, the partners. So your financial institutions, your nonprofits, faith-based organizations, anyone you think would be very valuable, their voice and their impact for the community. And then here is kind of the next few steps is to discuss kind of these key items, which Lucinda just mentioned earlier about deciding if financial education and literacy is important to the folks that are opening the account. Trying to see if the nonprofit would do some financial education and then the client would go into the bank and open an account. Really diving into this important piece. If we want these folks to be successful, we really need to give the opportunity to learn how to be banked. Obviously thinking about the proposed Bank On standards, like Lucinda mentioned, when we were in northern Indiana earlier this month, talking about are these standards, is your bank capable of offering these standards? Does it really meet the needs of the clients that are going to come in to the bank? So it's just different things you need to consider when you're talking about the program. Obviously financial products are in that same discussion of the Bank On standards. What's out there? What are the holes in your community that the products that are missing in the financial institutions? And then, discussing marketing communications. You can have a big splash and not get a lot of success, or vice versa. So discussing, having that kind of streamlined language and the approach is necessary to find success. And then, of course, as any good organization or program, figuring out a committee structure that works for your area. If it's going to be bi-monthly meetings, that only financial institutions meet, only the nonprofits meet. I mean, really, figuring out what's best for your area and then scheduling that meeting and sticking to it. So it's a lot of pieces, but definitely it's worth it, and you can do it. I'll throw it back to Lucinda.
Great, thank you. So, and in those discussions, each committee may decide to have its own sort of flavor, but that's one of the pieces that we're trying to help coordinate across lots of bank-ons, because we've heard very clearly from the financial institutions that they would like to see greater consistency across the bank-on communities, because it's just very hard to deal with different products or different marketing expectations or different financial education expectations. So that's one of the things that we're trying to learn from all of you, what your local community's preferences are and how much they align with the rest of the state, or at least your neighbors where there are overlapping financial institutions. So I think we've covered most of the basics. What I'd like to do is first offer to our panelists. We have a number of folks on the phone. I know that I don't want to speak for Laura or Kay from our financial institutions, but do either of you have anything to offer or anything that I've left out? I'll start with you first.
This is Kay, and I will just say that I think that the speakers so far have really covered the information well, and I am looking forward to hearing if there are any questions from the group, and if there are any ways that we actually from the Credit Union League can support the credit unions in Indiana to be able to offer the program.
Great, thank you, Kay. And Laura, is there anything from your perspective?
I would echo what Kay said. First of all, thank you very much, Lucinda, and the other participants for all the work that you put into this. It's helpful, I know, for those who are new to the program, but even for us who have been involved for years, it's always a good use of time to every so often reflect back on how this program has evolved. Similar to Kay, our financial institutions are eager to be of service to their communities, and so whatever we can do to facilitate that connection between financial institutions and communities in need.
Great, thank you. So, and then Caitlin, since you're on the line, Caitlin Larson is representing Treasurer Kelly Mitchell, who I believe Caitlin would offer, if it fits in her schedule, Treasurer Mitchell might be willing to come out. Caitlin, do you want to say anything?
Absolutely. Treasurer Mitchell is really passionate about Bank On and has loved getting to dive headfirst into this steering committee and this program as she's been in office just coming up on a year as of next week, which is pretty crazy. But she is willing to be helpful anywhere she can around the state, and any way our staff can be a resource, please let us know.
Great, thank you very much. And Ben Carmans with IHCDA, the Indiana Housing and Community Development Authority, who also runs the IDA program, for those of you familiar with that. I'm going to ask if anyone has any questions to go ahead and type those into the chat box. I'm not seeing any questions typed in just yet. So Ben Carman, I didn't know if you had anything to add from IHCDA's perspective, and speak up very clearly if you do.
Yeah, I just appreciate being on the call. It's really nice to see a lot of these things being rolled out. Before I was at Indiana Housing, I participated in Bank On Madison County and Delaware County, and I think it's great that a lot of these concerns are being addressed from the state level. just like the Treasurer's Office, Indiana Housing is willing to help in any way possible, and I'm excited to be a part of it. So thanks, Lucinda.
Great, thank you. So I'm looking to see if there are any questions. I'm not seeing any questions for the recorded part of our webinar. I'll give you just one more chance. If you have a question, type it in to the question box. Otherwise, we will conclude the recorded part of our webinar. And we will go to the unrecorded part. All right, going once. Well, on behalf of the steering committee, I want to thank you for participating in our Bank on Indiana update. We will be sending out additional information, and especially as that grant becomes available, we will share that. I believe it will become available later this week, is what I understood. So seeing no more questions, I will conclude the recorded part of the webinar, and thank you for attending.